Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. My name's Justin, and I know this is a very out-of-the-blue random video. I promised to make way more draft content back at the time of the draft. I released my mock draft before the NFL draft happened, and then I just disappeared. But that's because I got busy. School and life gets in the way sometimes, but I'm back here with another video. We're going to be talking about my top 5 things to look at when scouting college football players. Just a disclaimer for you guys, I did accidentally record this whole video in vertical, but I thought it was way too good to not upload it, so please forgive me. Next one will be horizontal. Now, of course, the college football season is well underway with 5 weeks gone through. It's crazy how fast it's going already. But this is about the time of the year where I start my scouting. I start looking at prospects, at players, making my scouting reports, giving grades, early mocks, and all that stuff. So I'm going to be talking about my top 5 things to look for when scouting and ranking them as well. It's not just 5 things. They are in order of what is most important to look at when scouting a prospect and least important, but still has value when scouting a prospect. Of course, this is in my opinion. I'm no way an expert. I'm simply a fan who loves to scout and give his opinions on his scouting reports. Some of my friends will tell you when they also scout. I disagree with them. I disagree with them heavily normally. But anyways, we'll get off topic here, or we'll get back from being off topic here, and we're going to be going in our normal order. We're going to go from number 1 all the way down to number 5 because I feel like number 1 should be obvious, and that is the film of a player. Looking at the tape, watching the film that they have, the game film. Obviously, teams and scouts and insiders and all that, they have way better access to film than guys like I do. I simply go off what I can get on YouTube. If there are good guys out there that are looking to scout players, I normally look up the player name and then verses, and then you'll get a lot of draft film. It'll be like all plays and whatnot. It won't just be highlights. You'll get versus specific teams. So recently I was watching Riley Leonard film, Duke quarterback, really great player. I really like his tape, what I'm seeing from him. But I just look up Riley Leonard versus and able to see, games against Clemson last year, games against Clemson this year, games against other teams. I believe I watched him versus Boston College and UConn. So you're going to be able to find games to watch if you really want to. But I think the tape is obviously the most important. It's what all scouts really should have is their most important, because you're really seeing the player present everything that they have on the field. You're watching them make the plays, you're watching, and you're able to see, especially with all 22 film, which if you don't know, that's where you can see all 22 players on the field. It's a little bit of a higher view. You can kind of go in, see what the quarterback's looking at, see, what you're looking at, see how they're reading the defense and how they're reacting to what's going on live time, which is really, really good for scouting. Obviously, I'm not able to always find that. All 22 is very rare to get your hands on it unless you're really, working for a big network or for a team. But I do my best to get the film as best I can. But obviously, the tape is the biggest part. You're seeing everything that a player is doing on the field. You're seeing how they lead. You're seeing, the athleticism. You're seeing their skills, their traits on display. You're seeing their techniques, what they can do, what they can't do, what they struggle with, what they're good at. It's just the absolute best way to scout a player. The second thing that I look at when scouting a player, which could be a little controversial, is the measurables, right? You see teams every year fall in love with a player because of measurables, especially when it comes to the combine. Someone will have a really good 40 or a really good bench press or a really good 3-cone or just drills, which obviously drills are a little bit less measurable and more talent, but it still happens, especially at pro days too. You see players come out and show out and measure really well. They're tall, they're fast, they're lengthy, they've got good muscle on, they're just athletic. It's really what measurables comes down to. It's the traits that you can measure. You can't measure a player's skill, but I can measure their height. I can see how fast they are. I can see how much they weigh. I can see how long their arms are. Those are the type of things you can measure. And there are teams that fall in love with that. You see the Raiders, they're a type of team that takes height, weight, speed every single time they get the chance to do it. We saw, they've taken Dorial Green-Beckham in the past and Henry Ruggs and Damon Arnett, height, weight, speed. They don't always turn out, but that is something that teams look at. It's something that I look at heavily. You want a guy with ideal size or speed or athleticism at a position. When I'm looking at offensive tackles, I know there are certain teams who will not take a player if they don't meet the height or weight requirement that they want. It just happens. You look at a guy like Rashawn Slater a few years back. He could have been the first tackle off the board. He very well could have. He was a little bit too short for certain teams taking at the top of the draft. It just happens. Obviously, measurables don't always determine how good of a player you're going to be. There are outliers of shorter guys, lighter guys, guys with shorter arms, smaller hands that just play better than you would expect them to, or just they're able to outperform the hindrance of the lack of measurables at certain areas. There's slow guys who play really, really well and faster guys who are not good. I'll bring up some examples. A guy like Dree Archer, one of the fastest combine 40s of all time. John Ross as well. Neither of those guys really turned out to be much in the NFL. And then you look at guys with slower 40s, just slower overall players. I look at like a quarterback. Obviously, Brady was not the most athletic guy. The measurables were not off the board, but he's the best player of all time. So it just happens to be something that you really should look at, and something that I probably overvalue a slight bit, but I think that's just the thing that I rank the second highest as far as scouting goes. Number 3 on my list, that's a weird looking 3. Number 3 on my list is leadership, which is something you can't really see much. You can see a little bit on tape and through interviews and all that, but it's a little bit harder of a thing to be able to scout unless you're a team. You're getting to do combine interviews with teams, and that's another thing. You can get a little bit through looking at interviews throughout the season, post-game, pre-game, stuff like that. Maybe they'll give a good halftime speech that gets passed around Instagram or Twitter or X as it's called nowadays, I guess. But really, the leadership in the interviews and how they carry themselves as a person on and off the field, as well as a football player on and off the field, is very important. You see guys who are extremely talented but just don't have the attitude to be a great NFL player, and you see guys that have that mental attitude that makes them great. It's something, again, it's really hard to actually scout and see, but it's something that is extremely important, and then I rank in my number 3 spot. Number 4 coming in is scouting. The common term you hear for this is scouting the helmet, right? There's the common connotation with Ohio State and Alabama quarterbacks, how they're never really successful in the league much. That's where people are scouting the helmet and not the player. Obviously, it's weird how those players and those teams just aren't producing great players at that specific quarterback position. It's odd, I'll admit that. But you're scouting the player, not the helmet, right? You can see CJ Stroud, he's played so well this year. And there were a lot of people who just assumed, he's an Ohio State quarterback, he's coming from that system, he can't play well. I fell into that trap a little bit, I'll admit. Although I do think he had issues with reading defense coming out of college into the draft, he's proved me wrong so far. He's playing very good down there in Houston. And he's looking to be like a great pick. And we see guys coming from lower schools as well, like smaller schools, Group of 5, FCS. This is where this comes into play, I think, even bigger than those bigger schools that don't typically produce those positions. I'm looking at guys like Trey Lance, right? Let's use Trey Lance, for example. He got a lot of, and he's getting a lot of bad rep currently, but he got a lot of bad rep before the draft because he wasn't coming from a big school. He played so well at North Dakota State. He's not playing against good competition. He's coming from a small school. There's going to be knocks on those guys all the time by guys who scout the helmet, right? You're seeing he's coming from North Dakota State. He's coming from this Group of 5 school. He's coming from this small school. He's not going to be as good against this guy from Georgia just because he plays at Georgia and is going against Alabama and LSU and Tennessee. That's not always the case, and it's almost never the case, right? How many guys in the NFL? There are so many players in the NFL who are coming from these Group of 5 schools, these smaller schools, and so many great players and good players and starters and role players. It's a little bit of a crapshoot when you're drafting, right? Obviously, you can do the scouting. You honestly can never 100% fully know. But if you fall into the trap of scouting the helmet, it gets a little odd. Now, obviously, there's times where you take one of those smaller school players and they're just not good. Or you take one of those big school players just because they went to a big school and they are good. There's always going to be outliers. That is always, always, always going to happen. But I wouldn't go against a smaller school player if their tape looked better just because they went to a smaller school. I remember talking to my brother about Trey Lance. And I'm like, if he can make the throw in the exact perfect spot it needs to be, I don't care if that... I don't care who's covering. It could be a 5'4", 12-year-old boy or Jalen Ramsey. If the ball's in the spot it needs to be, it's going to be caught. I mean, that's just what this is what happens. I don't care what helmet you're wearing, whether you're wearing an Alabama helmet or North Dakota State or Baldwin Wallace or the smallest possible school. It's going to be caught if the throw's in the place it needs to be. And I'm talking only mainly for quarterback here. But there are other things you can look for every other position that just encapsulates this whole don't scout the helmet policy that I go by. And last but not least, number 5, the least important thing that I look at when scouting is stats. I hate, and I can say this I can say this full-heartedly, I hate with a passion box score scouts. I see so many of them in Instagram comment sections mainly, and it pisses me off. Guys who would be like, oh, this guy's stats are terrible. He's not a good draft prospect. He's a terrible player. I could not care less what his stats are looking like. I mean, here's the thing, right? Obviously, if a guy produces well, he's going to get better reputation. He's going to gain more popularity. And his tape is probably at times going to look better because you're going to see him produce more plays. But if you throw 40 touchdowns, but all of them are busting coverage, wide open throws, and none of them are very accurate, but they're still caught because they're wide open, that your tape doesn't look better than the guy who maybe threw 12 touchdowns, but they were all extremely incredible throws that were right on the money, perfectly where they needed to be, right? I'm not going to judge those guys the same way. I'm not going to look at a guy with great stats and be like, he's a way better player than this guy with lesser stats. If the tape if the tape tells that same story, then great. You produced and you got great tape. If it doesn't tell that story, then I don't know where you're producing these stats from, but the tape doesn't look like a draft prospect. I mean, I think one of the biggest things, I bring up another example because it's always helpful. Will Levis from last year did not have good stats at all, whatsoever. So many guys in comments saying, oh, he's the worst quarterback prospect this year. He's not a good prospect. He shouldn't be first round. When in reality, I had a first round grade on him. A lot of other people had a first round grade on him. He really very well could have gone in the first round. He just didn't. And it's nothing to do with the stats. I mean, he had great measurables. He was a great looking prospect, great player. He just didn't throw for all his touchdowns and make those flashy stats that these box score scouts want to see. I mean, I'm not gonna take the guy with, I'm not gonna take the running back with 1,000 yards and 15 touchdowns over the guy with 500 yards and 5 touchdowns just because he produced more stats. No, I'm looking at the tape. How good does a player look on film? Obviously I'm going to look at stats very slightly, but it's not even close to the top thing I'm looking at. And this is controversial to a lot of guys who don't scout, but I'm sure actual scouts will agree with me on this one. Alright, and that's all I have for you guys in this video. If you liked, please sure to subscribe, turn on those post notifications. Let me know down in the comments if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. What do you guys look at for scouts, as well as who your favorite prospect that you've scouted so far this year is. I have to say for me, I have not gotten too far into my prospects yet, but Cameron Ward, quarterback out of Washington State, is by far my favorite prospect this year. Also, be sure to follow the podcast on Instagram at ThisJotJustInPodcast. We're going to be starting a podcast about sports and other random things with my friend Jared as well. So you will be seeing that on another channel. We'll be posting that on YouTube, Spotify. We've got an Instagram account going for it. Hopefully soon a TikTok will be getting up. So be sure to follow that and subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you all in the next video.